This is like one of the things that I think DePIN uniquely can solve, because like I feel like we're in this interesting place where we're hyper financialized in so far as using tokens, but like these are community driven business models. You know, the fact that you could have hundreds of thousands of people in a city like all contribute to these kinds of things, I actually think can be like a super important place from which social cohesion comes from.
At the current growth rates for DC burn, that 4x in terms of revenue need to grow 4x to become deflationary after the halving, that's going to happen in like 10 or 11 months. So the timeline for this, assuming growth rates stay the same, is really within a year in terms of Helium becoming deflationary.
I think the market's going to move to a very decentralized setup in general because it has to. There's just no other option for scaling energy capacity on grids today.
Smart people want to work on hard problems. And I think as an industry, we have a hard problem. And I think when I analyze the applications that we receive, it is from the best crypto companies, but also the best private equity investment firms. And I think we're at the really unique intersection in the market, which is we built really good technology and now's the time to deploy it.
Yeah, I've been shouting about DePIN composability from the rooftops for maybe 3 years now. And so seeing the way that they're bringing in partners and going to build basically an app store for DePINs to run on this device, I think is really novel and interesting.
I want to start off with talking about Mamdani in New York for our New York friends here. What is going on? What are your takes? I know the election's not for a few months, but what are you guys feeling kind of after the primaries and going into the general election?
I'm angry, man. I don't like it. I don't like what the city's becoming. I've lived here for 25 years and we're not going to let a socialist run the city. It's really sad because like over the last 10 years, New York has gone to shit a little bit. I think a lot of people who live here feel that insofar as like crime feels like it's gone up. The amount of homeless people around is pretty bleak. And like the Upper East Side, which is a neighborhood that, you know, for the longest time was gorgeous and well kept, is like, it's fucking terrifying. It's like you can't walk around Lexington Avenue in the 80s and 90s without like actually being worried anymore, which I'm not so super happy about. Jason, I don't know how you feel about downtown.
It's, you know, it can be sketchy in certain areas. I think, you know, one of those questions I always have is like, how much power does one person actually hold to like totally change the way like a complex economic system operates? Not great. It feels, you know, a little scary. I think the other side of this too is like we've seen San Francisco go through its down arc, and it's like, does New York really want to speed run that turbo?
Dude, the model I'm worried about is London, not San Francisco, because it's like a pretty similar dynamic of like you have a city that has a huge amount of underlying diversity where like most of the lower income jobs are done by immigrants or second generation types whose parents came here. And like they're a massive voting bloc that people don't ever think about. And it's super interesting to see that they found their voice. And not only have they found their voice, but like ideologically, they lean very, very socialist. Anyway, I always tell Connor, this is like one of the things that I think DePIN like uniquely can solve, because like I feel like we're in this interesting place where, you know, we're hyper financialized in so far as using tokens, but like these are community driven business models. And like, you know, the fact that you could have hundreds of thousands of people in a city like all contribute to these kinds of things, like I actually think can be like a super important place from which social cohesion comes from. And like for the Mamdanis of the world, their ideas are just so bad, if you ask me.
Yeah. Has he articulated much on crypto, if anything, or the tech broadly, or not specifically that detailed of a kind of plan yet?
I haven't seen him say anything about crypto specifically, but by the same time, like I feel like there's a hyper correlation between like people that have these kinds of social justice ideas and people that are inherently anti-business. So I don't think it would be a massive stretch to think he's probably not going to be great for the ecosystem.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the hope would be like, if we have a very pro-crypto administration in right now, kind of the executive branch, then like crypto will be protected. But there's been a lot of positive developments on that front. Santi, for you in Inversion, the question I want to pose to all of you guys, I think, is like, what'd you get done this week? What's been up lately with Inversion? I saw there was like a summer analyst program you guys had kicked off. I'm also very curious about like MVNO talks or target kind of acquisition talks, how those are going. So just curious for kind of an overall update on Inversion.
Definitely. a lot cooking. I mean, we've evaluated it now 15 different assets. It's a great time to be a buyer because rates are sticky. Financial engineering doesn't work. No one understands crypto engineering. And you're seeing a lot of proof points. I mean, it's like the thesis is simple. The execution will not. But I genuinely do believe that we do have a very unique insight and we're moving as fast as possible. So, the other thing is, like Jason, you can comment on this, but like when the mission is so bold, you attract really good talent. And look, I'm not shy to say that we're going to build the next Berkshire Hathaway, and it will have crypto features on the capital formation and deploying this technology in a way that is invisible, and businesses reap immense amount of value. And a lot of times in the conversation is so funny because people are like, so how big is the team? I'm like, is that really the most important question? Like, why is it that people are obsessed with putting a team, be like, I've seen teams of 100 investment associates at a large private equity firm do the dumbest deals. So, it's like, there's no agency. And so I think it's really funny in this journey where go study LVMH and how they are and the way that he built LVMH, no one took him seriously. And you know what? That's a great position to be in because you don't attract attention and you can just be a silent killer. And so, look, we're building in the open because we want to attract talent. So if you're out there listening, we are very much hiring. We had over 2,000 applications across all different roles. LinkedIn shut down our post. And
oh my gosh.
I think it's, I don't think we're unique in that, but I will say, A+ people, I think it was Mark Andreessen who said this phenomenally well as he has a way of articulating things. He says, smart people want to work on hard problems. And I think as an industry, we have a hard problem. And I think when I analyze the applications that we receive, it is from the best crypto companies, but also the best private equity investment firms. And I think that we're at the really unique intersection in the market, which is we built really good technology and now's the time to deploy it. And people, for better or for worse, are frustrated. If you're a team that has raised capital, built great products, and if you only are, targeting the 20 users that exist on chain doing recursive leverage, is very frustrating, and I think that's really the opportunity that that's the calling that we're inviting people to say, which is, if you believe in this technology, if you want to move away just from the speculation, and candidly, if you want to go back to your Thanksgiving dinner and tell everyone in your family, your uncle that is in telco or in financial services or in oil and gas, you can tell them, hey, here's a very concrete example of how this technology actually allows you to run your business in a faster, better way, cheaper manner. And honestly, that to me is, I wake up every day and that's like top of mind. But it's not easy, So there's every day there's like all kinds of nonsense and bullshit that you have to go through. But part of the game, I'm getting started. Jason's been losing more of his hair, but well,
of course.
I didn't want to comment on that.
Every day.
I mean that metaphorically, by the way.
Dude, I checked out the Hairdow offices last week. Crazy stuff that's going on over there. They're like using a DePIN type approach to solve hair loss. Fucking crazy.
Like in terms of research?
It's like DeSci.
Yeah, it's DeSci. They've got like, I think the team is almost 10 now. They're cooking, man. I was impressed. Anyway, Jason, I cut you off. What insights do you have on hiring for us?
I wanted to, and catching up with Santi, what's been really interesting to see is not just the level of crypto talent that's applying to Inversion, but as you mentioned, the level of private equity talent. I think this is like another signal. It's really a signal of two things. Number one, that like institutions are here. We're seeing that with DATs, of course. We're seeing that with stablecoin adoption. But like, it's no longer a black mark on your resume to say, hey, I'm interested in exploring going work for a crypto private equity firm. I think that's really interesting. And number two, I think it also points to the fact that private equity returns have really compressed. There's not a lot of outperformance. These organizations are bloated. You're an incredibly sharp 26, 27, 28-year-old. You're looking like, okay, can I make partner in 10 years? What is my bips on bips on bips of slice of carry in this thing? What am I actually going to make out of this for all these years of my life? And then someone like Santi and Inversion comes around and with a totally new way to generate outsized returns. And the market, like just from the quality of people that are applying to Inversion, has really kind of signaled that, hey, there's something to this thesis, which I think is pretty cool.
To be in fairness, Jason, I don't know if people really know the story, but Jason was one of the very few people that called me in the very early days where I just woke up one day and said, I'm going to do this. And I, at that juncture, I said, I'm either going to be incredibly private and secretive on what I'm doing. And then I'm just going to 10 years later, wake up and tell the world, hey, listen, I did all this. And the benefit of that is if you fail, no one knows. So you're quiet about it. But then a part of me was like, no, honestly, like if I want to build in the open because I want to document the journey and I want to invite people. And as soon as I tweeted, I think Jason like immediately reached out and said, hey, listen, man, I've done private equity before. I like this thing. I'm a founder of Daylight. And I thought I was going to get on the phone. They were thinking, he's probably raising and I'm likely going to invest because I like this guy already. He's like, hey, listen, it was 9 p.m. my night. And Jason said, listen, man, we can talk about Daylight another time. I love what you're doing. I want to get involved. I was like, well, what do you mean you want to get involved? Like, he's like, I don't know. It's just, I want to be a part of it. I just want to be part of the story. And honestly, like hearing that was a huge, you can be delusional and confident, but when you hear someone else that you respect be equally or more confident, it just like puts you on this hyperdrive. And I think I remember sending him the deck. He's like, hey, listen, it's pretty bare bones. Take a crack at it. And I said, I just got to probably in 3 weeks time, just like take a look at it and say it's great or whatever. Send him the Google link. I think I go to sleep. He's on the deck. I wake up. He's still on the deck. I'm like, is this guy ever going to sleep? He says, hey, by the way, here's a revised deck. I'm like, God damn, this guy, like, it's just
Let's go.
It literally lit me on fire. And I'm incredibly grateful, Jason. He's just one of those guys that understands that intersection, private equity and crypto. And you just don't find that many people.
Well, it's interesting because what it'll do for DePIN specifically, I think, if this thesis comes to light, right? I think it's really
100%.
beneficial in payments and it's really beneficial in DePIN. And if we can, acquire businesses that go and, start to use DePIN rails, like that's an incredibly exciting thing for the whole crypto industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this in the other pod, but like, let's talk about Helium, right? Helium continues to, the Helium MVNO metrics continue to go up. The number of hotspots continue to go up. There are some structural issues as to why I think we can point to the token not performing. But when you think about like, look at HiveMapper, I had a call with Demo earlier this week. Super interesting what they're doing. Generally, the thesis that we have is these network, like if you're a large company and you go down the P&L and you say, okay, this company spends 5, 10, 20% of revenue on this particular infrastructure spend from someone in the market. In telcos, you are beholden to a monopoly-like structure. And like this guy, 0x Munger, I think produced a report was pretty interesting, which is DePIN's so fascinating because historically, if you're a large company that needs this data, whatever that may be, location data, satellite data, network data, it's very expensive because these are infrastructure heavy. And so the company is going to sell it to you at what you're a price taker and there's no way around that. And now it's so interesting is we should have Ariel on the podcast. I was with him in the Solana Accelerate conference. I mean, just think about that for a second. DePIN networks are now at a point where there's something like HiveMapper is producing reliable, real-time, at-scale data that is equally or better than your Web2 analog, alternative. And at that point, like, it just makes a whole lot of sense for a company to then, I wouldn't say like totally replace the Web2 vendor, but like give a contract to HiveMapper, you're reducing costs. And that's always been like a core thesis we've had on Inversion, which is, it's not to say that you're going to buy an MVNO and totally rip and replace 100% of your data with Helium. You want to have redundancies, but like, the bull case of DePIN is how many more companies will HiveMapper lock over the next 12 months? How many more will Helium lock, right? You already have these networks that are producing real time, right? And I would say we get asked a ton, like, why now? And I think it matters a lot that you have a publicly traded company called Circle in the public markets, and the incremental company that goes public in crypto legitimizes this space so that where you go to the board and that you always want to need board approval, and you tell them, hey, listen, this company Circle and the Genius Act that, just passed, and it's actually legit, guys. Like, now's the time. Like, why? Tell me why we shouldn't use a HiveMapper if we can cut costs 10%. And they're like, honestly, at that point, you kind of have a fiduciary responsibility to give them a try.
It's interesting. We're seeing the same thing at Daylight, where the last month has been just the biggest legal gauntlet I've ever gone through. But we're almost there, where we're launching our energy subscriptions product the 1st of August, and this has a ton of capital behind it. Just kind of like traditional private credit. This is traditional renewable energy private credit that's working with us, and they're working with a DePIN crypto project because number one, it's been legitimized. The Genius Act is now law. There's now a law in the books for how stablecoins can interact. So they're not afraid with kind of working with tokenized products or taking in stablecoins. Like, that fear is totally evaporated. They see the Clarity Act pass the House. And they're like, oh, this is really interesting. Now this asset class is being formalized. It's being adopted. It's being legitimized. We can use Daylight and products like it to generate outsized returns on our private credit that we couldn't do in kind of the traditional sense. We want to get involved with this from the kind of ground level. And that's been really interesting to see, is the kind of opening up of traditional capital. I think over time, Pantera actually did a really good article, I think earlier this week, about kind of the tokenization of everything. I recommend everybody go read it. It was a really interesting thesis, but it's really about the convergence of on-chain and off-chain markets, and where, they kind of define on-chain markets as now a gravity well that's starting to suck everything in. And that's certainly what we're seeing on kind of the ground level, is these traditional private credit funds, which you would think as fairly risk-off investors, are actually quite interesting in exploring what's going on here and how they can interact with it. I also had another, large-scale private equity-backed energy company that I know the CEO of. They're backed by a very, very large tier 1 private equity firm. And he reached out directly just asking, hey, look, we're interested in expanding access and tokenizing some of our energy-based yield streams. Like, what are you guys doing? Is there a way to potentially piggyback? People are exploring this, and now there's permission to explore, right? And so this is, I think, going to be one of the most exciting cycles, because now there's permission to explore where there's never been permission to explore before.
I mean, it's literally been like complete bullshit for the last year and a half, where like the reasons people would give to not do something are just like insane. It's like, oh, it's crypto, oh, it's tokens. And like, I don't know about you guys, but I'm seeing in my business more and more that it's not just that people are willing to experiment, but like the premium for crypto is almost back, where like you could almost think about it insofar as like in 2021, there was a massive premium to do crypto. Between 22 and 24, I would actually argue there was a massive discount, where like you'd have to do extra work to justify why you were valuable or why you were worth working with. And that wasn't just on an investment perspective. That was on like a client perspective. Like, people come up with the stupidest reasons that they wanted to not do business with you. And I feel like that's starting to flip again, which I'm super excited about, because it means people at a default level don't just say no, which candidly, I think has been one of the biggest reasons why the space hasn't grown faster than it has. So that's really exciting to hear, Jason.
What's interesting, I saw a clip today from TBPN. The founder of Ribbit was speaking.
Yeah.
To comment, but he called it the token factory, and like their new thesis is for the whole firm is basically the token factory of both, tokenization in the sense of crypto tokens, as well as tokens in AI, and the intersection of both AI and financialization. And so their entire thesis revolves around this token factory, and I think it's just really interesting kind of convergence. They're always on top of what where the market's headed. So I thought that was a really interesting clip.
Yeah, I think they're like moving pretty heavily. I mean, they've always done a ton of crypto, but like it feels more and more all in crypto. And they're very bullish on energy markets for what it's worth. I think one of their big theses is that like the financial world is like a series of interconnected grids, and there's like the energy grid, there's the money grid, and like all of these grids are like interacting with each other at a far higher velocity than they ever have before. So I heard that TBPN segment as well. It was super bullish.
Yeah, and Mahesh, you've done some research and writing recently about a term that you've called user-generated services. So we need a drum roll for that. What does it mean to you? Is it a replacement for DePIN?
No. It's
why'd you put it forward? What does it mean?
I just in the process of our evolution as an industry and Ep.3 as a firm, I think we constantly experiment with like micro ways to describe macro behaviors that we're seeing at scale. And I think one of the things that we've realized over time, and we've talked about before, is that like it's kind of unclear what a DePIN is to some degree, and like it's this massive industry with tons of businesses wrapped up into it. And a lot of those businesses have in the past sort of said, yay, maybe we're not a DePIN. Maybe we should rethink this. It's a term actually I first saw Guy from A16Z use on Twitter. But the thinking is that, the complement to DePIN on the human side is this idea of user-generated services. So where on one hand you have physical assets autonomously working together to create value without some sort of a corporate intermediary, user-generated services is kind of the same thing with people, where like people are working together through a platform that isn't necessarily corporatized in order to create value for themselves and for the economy directly. The easy example that I always think of is there's this company we back called Daisy in the ZKTLS space that has created a solution that allows influencers to monetize posts from brands in real time. And like they've created a super simple algorithm that like lets them push content from a company through their network of influencers, match it to the right set of influencers, and then like re-amplify the message based on the next set of influencers that, match with the content and has an audience base that fits that content. So I think these kinds of ideas where it's like networks of people, where people are using their work, their influence, or their clout in order to deliver economic value is a super interesting emerging part of the crypto world that I think has been wrapped in DePIN historically. And like a lot of these ideas are, around this emerging narrative of ZKTLS, which is using like ZK proofs pretty much to prove private or Web2 data. I know Jason has been spending a bunch of time in that space as well. It's a super interesting area because it just like massively increases the aperture of like what we could do on the internet through verification. And like, we've seen a bunch of businesses get to, 7-8 figures of revenue in the last 6 months to a year. So user generated services felt like a really clean way to sort of term the space. But again, by the same token, it's orthogonal to DePIN and complementary, but I wouldn't say necessarily overlapping.
Gotcha. Okay. I mean, it sounds like DePIN could potentially even be like a subset of this broader category too, but
it could be. I think about it on a spectrum as of right now, where on one hand you have DePIN, on the other hand you have user generated services, and all of this is like really the direct to consumer economy. My goal at the end of the day across all of this is move away from corporations, move away from like having to force people to have full-time jobs where they commit all their time to like one person, and let them democratize value. And like, it's been super exciting to see DePIN do that on the hardware side. And there's like a people related way to do this as well. And, whether we call it user generated services, I don't know, but it's an early term that I think has some staying power and some traction.
yeah, we'll need a market map, a landscape map at some point where we have everything clearly laid out with logos, so it's easily understandable. But that all makes sense. Let's have Nick from Blockworks Research join us now. So I'm going to let him in. But as a quick intro, Nick is the DePIN analyst at Blockworks. What's up, Nick? Thanks for joining us.
Sorry about that. My mic is rugging us today, but it's cool.
You're good, man. Welcome to the show. We've been talking all things DePIN, but wanted to welcome on our friend Nick from Blockworks Research. He's the DePIN analyst there. He's been in DePIN for a long time. I'd say he's earned the OG classification. But yeah, Nick, you've been putting out a ton of good research, dashboards, reports about some of the largest, kind of most prominent DePIN protocols that are earning a ton of revenue, have a lot of growth going on. So just wanted you to walk us through some of the research. If you could screen share maybe the Helium halving report or thread first, and then just have a couple questions there. But I think Helium, has already come up a few times during this conversation in terms of having a ton of growth recently. And yeah, so the halving's coming up to actually in 6 days, basically. What was going through your mind when you came up with the idea for this report, and what are the highlights that our listeners should be thinking about? I mean, I think the trend towards deflationary is the main thing, but yeah, curious your take.
Yeah, I was digging into, obviously, like people were talking about the halving. I was digging into the on-chain data and starting to analyze like what is it going to take for a DePIN to become deflationary today. And my takeaway there was that I don't know, there's all these rumors about some sort of equity conversion happening with Nova Labs and the HNT token, and so exploring that. But what I came away with here was that regardless of any tokenomics change, post halving, a 4x in revenue is going to push you deflationary as soon as you hit that milestone. And so really just started digging in on that front. Utilization of the network is super high. It's exploding at this rate. And I think most utilization going forward is going to be probably through Helium mobile subs as well as carrier offload internationally, which I'm sure Santi could talk a little bit more about here.
Yeah, hopefully he's going to be adding to that pretty shortly. But I also did maybe like some of the math that wasn't clearly laid out here, but that you kind of dog-fooded myself and all of our other kind of readers too, which was that at the current growth rates for DC burn, that 4x in terms of revenue need to grow 4x to become deflationary after the halving, that's going to happen in like 10 or 11 months. So the timeline for this, assuming growth rates stay the same, is really within a year in terms of Helium becoming deflationary. And then the thing you mentioned earlier about the whole token equity potential merger, there's $6 million of anonymized location data in terms of ARR that's accruing to the equity entity right now. And then there's also another I think $27 million of MVNO revenue from customer subscribers, of which I am one, paying $5 a month because I got grandfathered in. I was an early supporter. It's the cheapest phone plan of all
$5 a month still.
$5 a month for unlimited
Motherfucker.
T-Mobile and Helium internet.
I don't know what's more interesting, locking in 0% on your mortgage or $5 on the plan.
$5 is pretty good. I basically bought a new iPhone with the savings because I think before I was paying like $85 or $90 a month. So it's literally like, $80 a month of savings times 12. It's almost $1,000.
And your OGs on the plan are still getting the mapping rewards. Any new plan is getting the cloud points or whatever they are.
Yeah. Which Jason talked about a lot actually with Amir last episode in terms of the calculus from Helium to issue kind of token rewards for certain things versus like non-financialized like points that can be redeemed for different things, but they're not specifically kind of like a financial instrument in terms of a token. But yeah, I mean, if there is some kind of equity token merger, you can basically lump on another $33 million of revenue onto a $4 million revenue business. And so I think the potential dilution that would come from that in terms of token supply needing to go up to accommodate the equity investors could potentially be worth it. Yeah, I'm curious for you guys, like, have you done any kind of modeling or math in terms of what token dilution percentages are kind of accretive versus not? Or just how are you thinking about an equity and token merger for Helium or for other DePINs in general?
Yeah, like I feel like we used to run a bunch of math on this stuff, and I think what we've learned over 3 years is like people aren't doing the granular math on these kinds of things. They're kind of going on the basis of like how do they feel about it and like how does it change their behavior. And I'm super, super bullish because like I actually think the biggest thing Helium needs is like a behavior change among its participants, whereby people like go from treating these things as like meme thing tokens that may not ever be worth anything to like actually treating these things like the equity of the business, which it is. And like I just think for a lot of people right now, like there are infinite ideas like percolating through the internet that like Helium is paying people in meme coins, and like that's just like a tough pill to take. So I think having a huge amount of clarity around the structure where you're merging the equity and the token will be a massively bullish event, because it's something candidly that crypto companies have had to struggle with for 5 years because they haven't had any regulatory clarity. And so doing it in a way where you're explaining to everyone exactly what's going on, even if you're diluting the supply of the token by 50%, I think ends up leading to more people holding it than selling it. And the other thing to think about here is like there used to be this weird part of Helium structure called HST, like the Helium security token, which got a huge amount of rewards. And those are all being rugged. Like the VCs have been told you're not going to get rewards for these going forward. So the dilution, if you actually completely rethink the token structure, doesn't end up looking as bad as people think. And then you have like a massive pool of revenue behind this token and you know exactly what the token is. I see it as like outwardly bullish. But Jason, Santi, I don't know about you guys. You're a bit more in the weeds because you're actually launching these yourselves.
Deflationary is good. I don't know what else to say. Deflation is better than inflation.
And I mean, maybe you don't want to comment on it at this time, Jason, but like if you guys were to ever launch a token, would you want it to have an equity component and a token component? Would you want it to be combined? Like in an ideal world, like what's the kind of path forward for DePINs and maybe for you guys specifically?
It's a great question. I think alignment is like super, super critical. And it's something that we definitely want to explore. Now, I think alignment is a spectrum, right? Like there's not one way to do this correctly. You look at Morpho, which is, I think, a fantastic kind of alignment that they've pulled off. I'm not entirely sure how compensation worked for the structure, but basically their equity company, their labs company, was acquired by what is effectively their DAO. And so now the equity company is effectively employed by the DAO itself. And that equity cap table has been wiped out. It's wholly owned by the DAO. And now they can align everything, all their economics that they're generating as a network, directly to one single asset, which is the Morpho token. Helium sounds like they're exploring something similar. But then there's a lot of interesting articles that like Miles Jennings at A16Z has put out. He put one out recently on kind of the end of the foundation era, which I think is really a very good article most people should read. Foundations in general, I think, are pretty parasitic to most crypto projects. And I'm glad we're moving to a world where we're kind of leaving the foundation era. And one solution that they've offered is that these equity companies, these lab companies, can actually convert into PBCs, or a public benefit corporation, where you actually have a stated chartered goal or mission for the company outside of pure the shareholder maximization relationship. And that allows you to do things like say, our equity company exists for the benefit of this token network and the token itself, rather than for the maximal benefit of shareholders. And that's a really interesting kind of additional point of alignment that one could go, or like an early point of alignment. And then we're seeing, of course, like all this work on DATs, Athena launching like a DAT, should these equity companies, these labs companies themselves become DATs. And then they, number one, use the capital markets to acquire their token, and number two, use the services they provide their network to generate additional cash flow on top of the pure capital market structuring to purchase additional tokens. I think there's like a lot of just interesting evolution of all these companies, but it's become pretty clear that if you want to launch a crypto network today, you need to find a way to maximize the alignment between the labs company and the token. That's just clearly what needs to be done.
3 observations. 1, first mover advantage in this particular case, in crypto in particular, is overrated. Because now, daylights of the world that haven't launched a token can look at Morpho and can look at the mistakes of other networks. I heard it from Maker back in the day, and they said, gosh, it sucked to be the first in DeFi because all these other protocols have learned from our mistakes. And then it's really, really hard to kind of rework it. The footnote to that is, I've never seen any product service company that has a ton of demand and can figure out the financial engineering. So if you have a good this is why I'm not worried at all about networks, DePIN networks that have strong underlying demand for them. This is workable. What you don't want is pure financial engineering, going back to private equity, and as with 99% of the vaporware in crypto, if you don't have a good product, no amount of incentives, no amount of airdrop is going to solve your problem. That's not the case for Helium, and that's not the case for other DePIN networks. So optimistic. The 2 other things, of course, I was listening to 2 podcasts that I think are instrumental. We want to be creative in terms of structures. Visa as a company, fantastic episode on Acquired. Everyone go listen to that. I tweeted about it. It is pretty interesting how they've assembled this consortium and how they've structured it. They're kind of the first like DAO, actually, I think. That if you think about what Visa, the network is, it's a huge coordination undertaking. The second one, I just listened to this yesterday, is Novo Nordisk. Is a Danish company, famously developer of Ozempic. And they have a very interesting corporate governance structure that, to Jason's point around like maximizing, creating a corporate structure that like allows you to prioritize certain interests over the traditional maximize fiduciary responsibility, like shareholder value. That structure is super interesting. A lot of Danish companies, including Lego, and other Nordic companies like IKEA, are structured this way. So all this to say is, I think if you're sitting there, if you're Amir or someone else, I think go study what exists in the real world and has worked. Visa, Novo Nordisk, Lego, some of these corporate structures in the real world. And if you layer on top of that some interesting mapping of shareholder accrual on chain, the smart contracts and crypto coordination. But I do think that we can learn a lot from these type of examples. So it's worth studying that, because it's one of those design areas that hasn't been sufficiently explored, because historically we've resorted to lawyers to figure this out. And now you can actually have other people, that can, opine and also implement it, because before it was just not possible.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of deepens with strong demand and maybe a lack of financial engineering, I think Mike and GeoNet stand out as like one of the kind of oldest projects in Deepin that never took the time to be kind of hypey or do too much on the marketing side. He just kind of very slowly, steadily went out, served what is mostly like Web 2 demand, and accrued that demand to the token, showed it on chain, and really built, I think, a really strong community and stable of backers.
So, a crazy story about this. I first met Mike last year, and he came to me and he said, like a true diamond in the rough, like a ton of experience in the real world, like gray haired, passionate, a true nerd that I've learned so much from. And he's taken the patience to educate my lizard brain on these things. And he was getting way more traction in industry conferences. He says, I'm going to ag conferences and talking to farmers and talking to these clients, and they all are using us. And I'm like, huh. So it was like a rare quadrant of getting more love outside of crypto than within crypto. And you can point to a couple of reasons. It was deployed on Polygon, which is not, it's like being listed in the Saudi Arabia Stock Exchange. Well, no, brother in Christ, relist in New York. These things matter.
Go multi-chain, yeah.
Again, good product. So when I invested, what I asked Mike to give me a soft commit on was redeploying in Solana. I said, you want to get attention? You have to play the game. Go and deploy in Solana. Not a dig on Polygon, not a dig on, that's just the capital markets being capital markets. And so he did that. And then I remember in the round, it was like CoinFund, Pantera, and I myself, sized are pretty big actually. And I remember initially Multicoin passed. And I think something to the effect of like, it's a very niche market. I'm like, location data is really not that small if you think about like all the different possibilities, especially with mapping and all this stuff. Robotics, gaming, location-based stuff is going to be huge, right? And it's funny because, again, I think a hallmark of a really good investor is changing your mind and revisiting your thesis. A year later, GeoNet raises another $8 million led by Multicoin and my former fund PairFi and a couple others. So kudos. I mean, that to me is just a great story that encompasses a lot of really good things, which is Deepin getting a lot of traction and then investors changing their mind, and also the market size growing pretty dramatically for GeoNet, right? It's one of those where they've been able to map and they have these like anchor towers that provide this data. And I think I'd be curious, Nick, or anyone else, if you have an opinion on their tokenomics, because I think it's one of the more clean value accrual mechanisms for like these NFT holders that like if you deploy that device, like and you're supporting the RTK network, it's like a pretty well designed mechanism.
Yeah, I mean it's almost not even a crypto project, right? Like they just happen to have a token because it's a great way to incentivize building out the supply side. But that said, I think that GeoNet's tokenomics are solid. They're super easy to understand. One of the things going back to Helium that I hear super often from anyone outside of the DePIN space is like, I can't wrap my head around the Helium tokenomics. And that's been true basically since the L1 migrated to Solana. I think things have gotten a little bit cleaner as of late. But yeah, GeoNet's tokenomics are super easy to understand. They post everything that you need to see on chain and everything's verifiable through that route.
Nick, I want you to post something that is the Giga Bullish post should be something to the effect of, you have HiMapper, which is mapped a third of or more than a third of the world's, like the fastest mapping of the world's roads with like a fraction of the capex. So ascribe that number. GeoNet, now the largest RTK network in the world with like a 1/100th or less of the capex than Trimble and some of the other Web2 players. Someone should just do a side-by-side, like coverage, capex raised, and then of course the third column, which we all don't want to talk about just yet, which is his revenue, which is this, I promise you, bro, is on the come.
Yeah, let's talk about that though. I mean, it is there. It's not maybe as big as we'd want it to be, but Nick, what did you see in the data in terms of revenue growth? How much of that's accrued to the token in terms of burn rate and emissions and that kind of potentially balancing out as well? Because from my understanding, Helium and Geodnet are kind of the two leading DePINs in terms of being closest to being deflationary. They're like between a 2 and 4x, but curious kind of what the data told you as you looked through this?
Yeah, so I can't take credit for the dash. Victor from our data team cooked on this one, but generally just seeing that GeoNet's growth is super steady. I think probably the most staggering thing you're going to see in this data is just that GeoNet is really building out a consistent flywheel, and they're passing the majority of revenue back to the token. It's really on the adoption side, I think, that GeoNet is lacking, and that's not necessarily at any fault of their own, just that it's a super niche industry. These sales cycles are multi-year, maybe even decade-long. And so moving to a new provider for an RTK service, I think, is a little bit of a moat with the incumbents that you're seeing in the market right now. That said, I'm super bullish GeoNet, and to Santi's point about like coverage versus your Web2 incumbents here, GeoNet's the only DePIN or maybe even crypto project that I'm aware of that has a long-standing relationship and contract with the U.S. government, with the Department of Agriculture.
There we go. And the chart in the top right there was probably the most interesting one to me, which is basically burn rate. So GeoNet like burns from revenue versus token emissions. And do you know why it spiked up recently, by the way? But it's close to 40% now, which means they're like a 2.5x in terms of revenue away from being deflationary on like a per block basis or per incentive period basis. But yeah, do you know why it spiked like that suddenly?
I haven't been in the weeds with GeoNet data lately, but I am assuming that is entirely from revenue growth.
Well, I was going to move us to, I guess like one last thing on GeoNet is the payback period is also really solid. I mean, that's something that I think a lot of like hardware deployers do think about. It was something I thought a lot about when I was buying hardware for this DePIN or that DePIN. But if the median 30-day earnings are $83, the device, at least the lowest end version of it, retails for $700. So that's like an 8 to 9 month payback period right there. And there's obviously some utility from the data it's generating as well for whoever sets that up. So just wanted to note that.
Plus the guarantee, right? Because if you buy it and you have the depending on the tier of the NFT, but it's like you're guaranteed earnings, which is, a pretty good feature, right? It gives you always want the certainty on the cash flow side on the payback, because if the market, the nice thing about GeoNet is like for Helium, you just have to kind of have the prime location, and kind of GeoNet too, right? You need to have the land or whatever, or have a partnership in place. But correct me here if I'm wrong, Nick, but like the earnings, one of the things that we should look at is the earnings dispersion across deployers. Because I think in Helium, I think it's pretty dispersed, right? If you're in a really high traffic location in a mall in San Antonio, Texas, like, yeah, okay. There's just certain locations that produce just a lot and are rewarded proportionately. Layer 0 is going to have this function too, which it kind of makes sense, right? You should be earning your proportionate share of the contribution to the network. But the dispersion, I think, is interesting, just more so to understand the incremental deployer. Are they going to have that visibility that you just pointed out, Connor? Which is, hey,
actually,
is it
GeoNet does a better job of this than maybe anybody, Santi.
That's what I'm saying.
GeoNet baked into the protocol is this idea of like hex boosts, where they boost these like, and I certainly haven't studied this very deeply, but like they have this cool concept of hex boosts where users can actually see where that demand is verifiably exists and go claim those boosts that they deploy in a certain amount of time. Yeah, GeoNet.
Yeah, it's a 2 to 4x boost, I believe. My one caveat here on GeoNet is that it's not like a retail DePIN miner's dream. It's not super complex to set up, but you need an almost perfect location to earn, even half of this $76 figure here. And so you don't need to be a professional deployer, but you need to know what you're talking about in terms of the setup.
To be fair, this is like an unpopular opinion of mine, but I'm not sure any like Uber consumer friendly anybody can do a DePIN has ever hit product market fit on the demand side. Even like Helium today on the demand side, like it's not super easy to go set up like the 5G cells. At least it wasn't when they were in CBRS. I don't know if it got easier with Wi-Fi, but for the most part, it's being done by professional deployers. So anyway, I actually think that's actually a positive, right? Like professional deployers don't just turn off or unplug their boxes.
For sure.
Where do you put Hivemapper on that spectrum, Jason?
I mean, if you study kind of Hivemapper, it seems pretty clear that the majority of its growth is coming from fleets and not from individuals. So you're seeing fleet operators go and orchestrate these, or you're seeing individuals stand up their own little franchise businesses and run their own fleets. But either way, it seems to be the majority of the growth. I mean, you see the pictures all the time, right? Like you'll see people post like they're like 20 B cameras that came in the mail. And it's like, of course, those aren't going in one car. So I think you're seeing like actual professional fleets, like trucking fleets and things like that. And then you're seeing small, like quote unquote franchise operators deploying these across their friends and family or whoever else that they know that drives quite a bit on attractive maps.
Yeah, you're right. That's probably the way it should be. That's a good point there.
There's probably some kind of like inverse relationship between how easy it is to set up a device and the value that it generates, and also how reliably it generates that value. But go ahead, Santi.
Well, the last component here that would be interesting just to complete the picture is a depreciation schedule of the device, right? Because again, I always go back to I've said it publicly in the pod, which is the first DePIN network is Bitcoin, and you have all these miners expend resources, but like I never got comfortable investing in any of the miners, because I always felt that the Bitcoin would vastly outperform a miner. Meaning, if you're buying an ASIC or like a Bitmain machine, the depreciation schedule on that was much faster than what they would lead you to believe. Such that if you wanted to be competitive, you would have to like replace these pretty expensive machines to be, to contribute to hash power and like mine Bitcoin. And the payback on that was terrible, because what I'm trying to say, most people grossly miscalculated the depreciation schedule. These machines were very obsolete. By the time Bitmain shipped it to you, they were already mining it for 6 months. And they had a competitive edge. But that's not the case here, right? Like, what's the depreciation schedule or the average life of your hotspot or, your GeoNet hardware? Like, this hardware is pretty, like, low level and doesn't, the servicing costs, someone should just put together the all-in complete picture, because when you're talking about payback, you have to factor these things in. Like, what's the depreciation schedule? What's the ongoing maintenance and servicing costs and, uptime and reliability and all that stuff? Is it open source? Is it commoditized hardware? Is it logged-in hardware? All this stuff.
Say what you will about the OBBB, the one big beautiful bill, but one thing that I caught that was baked into that is that there's a clause where companies can now depreciate telecom and compute assets 100% in year one.
Like Section 179, but for those assets.
Exactly, yeah.
It's interesting. Could have some deep in relevance here for some of the larger deployers. Guys, I know we're basically at time. Do we have a few minutes to go over to talk about Dawn, the black box? Or okay, cool. Let's hit that next. Nick, you also did some great coverage of the Dawn black box, which is a really big hardware launch, probably the biggest in DePIN recently. Take us through kind of the research here, like what stood out to you, what were you impressed by, what weren't you by, if anything, and yeah, just what was your overall take on the black box?
I'm a compute guy, right? I like to build my own hardware. I'm usually skeptical about buying something pre-built if I can spin it up myself and make sure that I'm doing everything the right way. That said, I've been shouting about DePIN composability from the rooftops for maybe 3 years now. And so seeing the way that they're bringing in partners and going to build basically an app store for DePINs to run on this device, I think is really novel and interesting. But I wanted to make sure I was getting a good deal here. So got down on some rough math, did everything that I needed to here, and came back to the assumption that they're operating on razor thin margins here. I mean, you're basically buying these at retail prices and they're slapping it together for you.
In terms of the compute itself. And then they also, and then there's also like the ability to mine a bunch of different DePINs. Well, there's also, I guess, a couple different features. I actually might be filming a 5 features of the black box video with Neil on Monday at the salon office. So I feel like I know these like down the back of my hand at this point, having looked at the script. But yeah, in addition to just the compute, there's all the utility for kind of the owner of the device. It's a Wi-Fi router. It gives you kind of on-prem, cloud compute and also storage. Lets you mine 10 plus DePINs. There's going to be this DePIN app store. There's a bunch of different things that it can do. Has anyone purchased one yet? Has anyone put their money where? There we go.
And it's another caveat here. It's fully upgradable, right? Like talking depreciation schedules, when a component goes bunk or is outdated, you can slap whatever you need to in there and keep using the black box. It should be pretty hardware agnostic theoretically. And I have heard that in the future they'll enable some DIY installations as well.
Super cool. Yeah, it sounds like a pretty modular approach to building the whole thing. Guys, anything else we want to cover today before we wrap? I think we covered a lot.
Selfishly, Nick, what's the most exciting emerging DePIN project that you are tracking, covering, sector or company?
I'll give you two. Number one is a black box partner, inference.net. I'm super bullish on open source AI models. If you're making a bet on open source AI models, they are one of the best inference providers in the space, and I think should be able to compete long term given the activity in the decentralized training space these days, both within crypto or with like companies like DeepSeek and Alibaba. I'm also bullish, and nobody's really talking about it on CT, but if you guys are familiar with Fuse Energy, they, I think, they've got a pre-existing business, right, in the UK with all the licenses and stuff in place and are looking to migrate that into a full-fledged DePIN over time. I've had some conversations with their team, and I'm super bullish on that. But I mean, the biggest overhang with virtual power plants and DePIN energy is going to be regulation, and they've overcome that and are just trying to build out kind of the supply side at this point.
I got one for you,
Yeah.
and it's called Daylight.
Well, I was going to say, that's a question I wasn't able to ask earlier because we had to blast through some questions, but something that has been in the news recently that stood out to me that I just didn't know the answer to and wanted to ask you, Jason, maybe Nick, if you have input as well, is like Tesla seems to be pushing ahead and have made the most progress with the whole virtual power plant idea in terms of demand response, actually interacting with the grid. They obviously have like this whole network of power walls distributed all over the country. There's kind of these like batteries on wheels, as they call electric vehicles. So maybe like what's the current state of virtual power plants in terms of what Tesla's doing? And then also how does that compete or be complementary with maybe like a DePIN approach to energy or a DePIN approach to virtual power plants?
Yeah, I think Tesla is clearly kind of leading the VPP market right now just by nature of the distribution they have. They kind of invented the residential battery space for the most part. So they have huge distribution. And you're starting to see it in markets in the Northeast, in California, a bit in Texas. You look at PJM just this week, the new capacity auction came out. Prices are 25% above where they were last year, where they were already at record highs. These are a new, record high setting. Lead times to build new generation, like traditional centralized generation, is measured in many, many years. So there's a ton of constraint on trying to build new generation. At the same time, there's obviously a huge amount of new demand or load coming in to match the grid or to consume from the grid. And so people are trying to study like where is all this new capacity going to come from? And the most elegant solution really is to build in a decentralized fashion. It is to put generation, put storage on homes and buildings, move their capacity off the major grid as much as possible, and use that as a resource to support the grid when needed. All of a sudden, that frees up existing capacity to flow to new loads or to flow where it's needed. So, the answer is like, I think the market's going to move to a very decentralized setup in general because it has to. There's just no other option for really scaling, for scaling energy capacity on grids today. So like, are all these products competitive? I think they're different in many ways. I think when people see what Daylight's really doing, it's going to look kind of like a DePIN. It's going to look a lot like a DeFi project. It's going to look, I think very unique in the market. But at the end of the day, what I like to say is like, commodity markets, right? It's like drilling oil wells. Every utility meter is an oil well. Only one person can own that well. Only one company can own that well. But there's a heck of a lot of places to drill. And there's a huge market for the end product, which is the electron. And so like, are these competitive? Yeah, we're all competing over the supply. We're not competing over the demand because the demand is there. That's kind of the beauty of these like true commodity markets. It's, can you compete on the supply side? And I would argue, the companies that provide the best service and provide the most value to their client base or their user base are going to be the ones that really succeed at scaling on the supply side. And you need to have a very differentiated view of how you're going to do that and how you're going to deliver value. And crypto projects are better positioned to do that than traditional projects. And it's why, in my opinion, we haven't seen a single energy company really break through as a household name yet. And I think that could change pretty quickly.
I mean, I'm immediately thinking like, how difficult would it be for a DePIN powered virtual power plant to get to this level of like output in terms of megawatts? Because then you can start to quantify like how long would it take them to be able to tap into that pricing of demand for that quantity of energy?
Yeah, I think it's a caveat here before I dive in. Tesla's VPP, you're not powering that with solar. So you're not actually generating electricity. You're siphoning it from the grid and then releasing it when demand is high, right? And being compensated for doing that. In terms
That's
of
not entirely true. Tesla does produce from there. They don't typically sell power walls by themselves. They typically sell them combined with solar. So the solar does produce, and then the excess solar stored in the battery is typically used to support the grid. There is some rare exceptions they don't. Base power is the exception where they're going battery only and they're charging from the grid and discharging back to it.
Interesting. I did not get to that point in my research, but thanks for the caveat there. But yeah, I mean, I think scaling wise, like retail is the way to scale. I think the daylight approach is probably the way to scale. Like you need to target people who are already interested in solar and create incentives that exceed what you're seeing in Web2 markets today, right? With your Fluence Energies and your STEM Incs and your Shine Solars of the world.
Sweet. Sounds like we need to do a separate episode entirely on energy maybe. But guys, thank you very much for all coming on. This was a great episode. Nick, thanks for taking us through the data and for covering DePIN at Blockworks. And we'll see you next month. Thanks, everyone.